The country of Iran has had a very unique setup for payments since 1979 when there was the hostage crisis. And many people will remember that here in the United States. How that payment system has developed is a unique process. And what it does and how it allows them to continue to operate on a daily basis is an interesting story in itself. Pleasure to be joined on that and much more by Philip Nichols, professor here at the Wharton School. Phil, great to catch up with you again. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you. Always good to talk to you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you as well. Obviously, we're talking about Iran in the scope of what has been going on the last couple of weeks with the conflict with the United States and Israel. But the sanctions that Iran has dealt with for almost 50 years now
Yeah.
really do tell an interesting story of how they have had to structure their banking system.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to think of, and sometimes I run across people who are like, oh, they must just use wheelbarrows full of cash. But no, they have a very sophisticated system that can do just about anything that you would find in Europe, in Southeast Asia. Um, and they're moving ahead with it. Their cryptocurrency, digital real. They have talked about becoming a cashless society. So it's a really interesting kind of microcosm that's developed, often with limited connections to Western financial systems.
Right, because with the sanctions in place, it's probably very challenging for them to try and do traditional business with Europe or the United States or other countries around the world.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, Europe did not impose as severe sanctions as the United States until relatively recently. And so there were payment mechanisms, particularly for the sale of oil, that went through Europe. Even though those were not, they did assiduously avoid designating any of those transactions or payment, you know, methods in dollars. But with the European joining the sanctions, with Iran being kicked out of SWIFT, that's when you really see this kind of development in isolation.
So, should we expect that Iran probably does have the ability to work some sort of banking and payments relationship with countries like Iran, or I'm sorry, like Russia, who are probably ones that are more like-minded to the type of operations that they will try and run throughout the globe at times.
Yes, it
Is that the
it
best
is.
way to kind of work my way around that?
Yeah, you did fine.
Yeah.
It's ironic that you asked that exact question because just recently, recently in terms of financial structuring, the mirror system, which is the system that Russia has developed, uh, c- connected with. There's now a digital connection with the mirror system and Iran's Shatab system. And so a Russian person who's using a credit card that's based in the mirror system can use that credit card just as effectively at a point of sale in Tehran. And they were talking about connecting with Venezuela's financial system. Whether that will happen or not is really interesting, given that the United States seems to be leaving Venezuela's regime alone. It's also interesting that now, just as an illustration, a couple of weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, Iran floated the idea of charging um, shipping that's paying a fee to Iran to get through the Strait of Hormuz
Right.
through, with yuan, Chinese yuan. And there's speculation that the Shatab system may be connecting to China's system, the cross-border interbank payment system in China. CPI is the abbreviation for that.
Where then does the impact mostly felt because of the sanctions that are in place? Is it more with the consumer, or is it more with the businesses that are in Iran?
Um, More with, well, that depends on the particular consumer.
Right.
So the average Iranian citizen d um, probably doesn't. I mean, Iranians travel.
Right.
The average Iranian citizen, just like the average citizen in the United States, probably doesn't travel extensively. And so the credit card, well, the cards are not really credit cards, that they're issued, through the Shtab system, through the 9 or so major banks in Iran. Those work fine throughout Iran. W but an Iranian who travels, particularly travels to Europe,
Mhm.
they need to set up a an overseas account. They need to jump through a lot of hoops
Yeah.
to connect to particularly the cashless societies of Scandinavia, etcetera. But for the businesses, those businesses that are engaging in transnational kinds of business, they do have to, it's more expensive to use the kind of payment mechanisms that have developed in as to get around the sanctions. They have developed, but they don't have the efficiencies that SWIFT or similar systems have.
And certainly going the other way, if you're talking about companies that are US based that would potentially want to do business in Iran, that obviously is something that the sanctions, have blocked for probably a long period of time. Probably, the banking entities here in the US like Visa and MasterCard, credit
Oh
card
yeah.
companies just cannot do business there.
No, there's no literally zero, ability to use your Visa card in Iran.
What does this tell us about where Iran probably needs to go moving forward? Obviously, they have a system and it works to a degree, but certainly if they were to probably change quite a few things, obviously, if they were able to move away from the concerns around missiles and the nuclear material that they have, they would be able to open up to far more countries to be able to have access to a lot more banking systems around the world.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It is a really interesting question. Iran, I mean, the money flows into Iran.
Right.
Iran sells oil to a number of countries, particularly India, and there's no, again, they just have to. They've built very effective means of moving money from India, for example, to Iran. Whether Iran would want to just jump back on board the SWIFT is a really interesting question, where if they're gonna be more inclined, China very quietly is pushing the CPI
Yeah.
and yuan designated payments as a more resilient system and an alternative to the US dominated SWIFT system. Where Iran would fall in that's a really interesting question. And as more and more businesses around the world, for a variety of reasons, are trying to become less reliant on the United States, are they going to build systems that Iran would say would naturally fall toward, or would Iran just fall back into the kind of Western
Right.
institutions? It's a great question. We don't really know the answer to that question.
So it's a wait and see at this point.
Exactly. Absolutely. I mean, they've got much bigger fish to fry right now.
Yes. Yes,
They're not
exactly. No question
they're
about it.
not really
Hey,
focused on that, but
Phil, but it
eventually they will.
right, and whatever the solution is to this conflict, they are gonna have to start considering these options, I would think, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's really hard to make predictions about the kinetic, about the war, and A lot most people that I know who have experience in that part of the world say this is gonna be very protracted, and there's gonna be a lot of all kinds of fallout from this.
Right.
Huge economic damage. If in the rosiest of situations, there was something like Venezuela, where the United States said, "As long as we get, our piece of the economic pie, do whatever you want." That then how that would work would be really interesting, how the money would flow would be really interesting, and would probably, as I think you're hinting at, lead to some kind of swift, light
Yeah.
rapprochement with between Iran and the Western-oriented kinds of financial systems. So that is definitely a possibility, and definitely something that Iran would have to think of if that very rosy outcome, were to happen anytime soon.
Phil, great to talk to you as always. Thanks very much for your time today.
Dan, always great to talk to you, and you always have a great question.
Thank you, Phil. Philip
All right.
Nichols, professor here at the Wharton School.